Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord is a game where you take control of a homeless narcissist with ambitious dreams of becoming a landed noble through the use of ultra-violence and war profiteering. If you ask me, that sounds great already, but today we're going to find out what happens when you combine Bannerlord with another IP that got it worse the second time around, because we're playing one of the most popular mods for Mountain Blade 2, and no, I don't mean hot butter. Realm of Thrones is a total conversion mod that replaces the discount bin fantasy version of Eastern Europe that is Bannerlord's Calradia with a premium fantasy Western Europe that is Westeros. Welcome to Westeros. I am a lowly bastard. Coincidentally, so is my character. He was conceived long ago when the future King Robert Baratheon was traveling through the Westerlands gathering political support. Based on my experience with Game of Thrones erotic fan fiction, bastards in Westeros bear a name corresponding to the land they were born in, and bastards from the Westerlands take the name Hill, so that makes us Bobby Hill. Our plan for today's playthrough is to claim Bobby's birthright and ascend to the Iron Throne. That means I will need to capture and execute all other claimants to the throne, which for now means Bobby's half-uncles Stannis and Renly, as well as our half-brother Joffrey. Then, we'll need to capture King's Landing and declare Bobby King of Westeros. Along the way, we'll have to put down any other claimants that pop up, all while becoming a certified G. For now, however, Bobby is what some might call a homeless weirdo, or an illiterate weakling. Therefore, the first thing we need to do is get jacked. Thanks to the inability of medieval medicine to synthesize human growth hormone, we're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way, by participating in an underground fight club. Or in this case, an above-ground fight club. See, it turns out that the citizens of Lannisport are big fans of gladiatorial combat, and that literally anyone can just walk in and participate. Upon entering the arena for our first practice fight, I couldn't help but notice that the bill hook we were given looks 100% real, and so does the liter of blood that splattered on the ground every time we used it to practice on somebody. Bobby began his career as a psychopath by murdering a few of his fellow participants before taking what seems to be a real crossbow bolt directly to the neck. But it will take more than an unlicensed tracheotomy to stop us. We got right back in the ring, beelined for the amateur surgeon that knocked us out last time, and calmly served him papers for our malpractice lawsuit against him. With a small slice of vengeance achieved, Bobby continued dominating the other homeless who were desperate enough to do this as long as the arena master would let him. Turns out they pretty much do this all day long. The breaks in between rounds are apparently so short that they barely have time to drag out the bodies of the last batch of victims before they let Bobby back into the still blood-soaked arena to take another percentage point off the local unemployment rate. It wasn't long, however, until Bobby's lust for adventure compelled us to seek out more dangerous prey. We leveled up a few times during our bum-fighting phase, and made a little money, too. So we carefully selected a few helpful perks, and then spent all of our winnings buying a spear and a nice apron Bobby could use to keep the blood off his clothes. I also decided to pick up this little bib, because I appreciate the disrespect for geometry on display when it clips through my apron. For supplies, we picked up some meat and butter, the breakfast of champions, and then set out to find some bandits. I decided to take a gamble and attack a group of broken men. I had no idea what to expect in terms of their equipment, and was pleasantly surprised to see that it was just those homeless guys from the arena with sharpened sticks for spears. I started by offering the archers free body piercings until I had achieved ranged superiority, which is a lot like air superiority in that both allow you to target your enemies without being threatened yourself, unless you accidentally run into a tree. We managed to take this group of bandits down with minimal damage to ourselves. The loot, however, was a little underwhelming. While I was hoping to loot the sword one of those bandits charged me with, unfortunately Bobby was more interested in collecting their shoes as trophies. While Bobby was harvesting his trophies, a group of mountain bandits decided they didn't like how unbroken our neck was and picked a fight. In an attempt to sound threatening, they called us a sheep, which caused Bobby to channel his inner Q shaman and charge at them with his spear, perforating their circulatory systems. I repeated this process until it was down to me and the bandit leader, who had a horse of his own. What ensued was a game of chicken I was destined to win, because while he was trying to stab me, I was resolved to stab his horse in the face. This sent him flying face first into the dirt before his spear could connect. Now with the height advantage, finishing him off was as easy as a grown man front-kicking a 6-year-old. In the aftermath, we managed to take a few of the bandits alive, and somehow, despite being a lone beefcake on a horse, we were able to take all 3 captive and tow them behind us. Though we were denied a better spear or decent armor, we did find yet more new shoes and this legendary pair of baggy trunks. The apron was nice, but something about these just works better for our machismo aesthetic. Now emboldened by the success of his killing spree, Bobby continued hunting down social rejects and impaling them until he had saved up enough shoes to afford an upgrade to his spear and his bow. This allowed us to streamline our bandit murder to shoe sales business operations. It was while we were shopping for these efficiency enhancers that I noticed there seemed to be some 2020 levels of inflation happening in Lannisport, with commodities like beer and tools costing several times their normal value. I set off for the nearby city of Case, hoping I could happen upon a price differential big enough to make us fabulously rich. On the way, a rather large group of marked men threatened to cut my throat unless I gave them my legendary pants. So I threatened to human centipede all 22 of them together unless they gave me all of their shoes right now. Naturally, they had some objections, but Bobby was extremely persuasive. After this exhilarating bout of headshot practice, I was alarmed to realize that I could not take all 3 survivors captive, as my prisoner tow cable only had enough space for 2 more simps. I took the 2 most valuable looking, along with all the shoes of their dead friends, and left one alive and barefoot to tell my story before resuming my journey. Still, the loss of a profitable opportunity was almost more than I could bear. So on arriving in Case, I immediately visited the seediest bar I could find, looking for someone who wanted to buy the 10 nearly dead criminals I had been towing behind my horse since Lannisport. It was there I found this guy, who offered to buy my prisoners without me even having to ask. Out of curiosity, I asked if he was a slaver, to which he responded with this long-winded and well-rehearsed paragraph. I almost bought it until he accidentally said Calradia and broke the 4th wall, shattering both the illusion of my immersion and the illusion that he wasn't going to press these 10 guys into some kind of slavery. As I was walking away 400 gold richer, I happened to notice that Jaime and Tyrion Lannister were both hanging out in this bar. I struck up a conversation with Jaime, who was excited to tell me about how he murdered the last guy who hired him as a bodyguard, and then offered to come work for me. I decided we probably weren't the best fit. Before I could get the hell out of there, Tyrion accused me of being prejudiced against him for his grotesque deformity, and then offered to come work for me while threatening to sue me under the ADA if I said no. We couldn't agree on a signing bonus for now, so I lied and told him I'd reach out after clearing his proposal with HR. The fact that 2 of the most infamous and wealthy men in Westeros wanted to come work for me showed me that we must be doing something right. I don't know if it was the barely dried blood on our exposed nipples, or if they just saw me sell 10 men to a known human trafficker and wanted to get in on the ground level of that business. But something about Bobby told these guys we were going to make it big. From there, we proceeded to buy goods that looked cheaper here than they did in Lannisport, and set out to undercut local businesses. Though we had to defend our cargo a few times in transit, all the occasional broken men attacks really did was add more footwear to our shipping manifests. By taking advantage of some of the disgusting price disparities on goods like fish, grain, meat, and beer, we were able to successfully beat out local competition in both cities and rake in some huge profits from their economic disparity. However, even with the little bit of wealth we had scraped together, hiring enough steadfast warriors to set up a proper trade caravan or warband was still out of reach. It was then we decided to sign up with a war party to make some more money, and we joined up with Terrence Kenning's army. Some may question whether it was a conflict of interest for Bobby to join up with a vassal of Joffrey Baratheon when we ultimately plan on killing him and taking his throne. To them I say, yes. Yes, it was. But if Lord Terrence or anyone else is willing to subsidize my homicidal tendencies in the meantime, I to tell them no? Unfortunately, my choice of employer was absolute garbage, as Terrence spent 2 weeks riding around in a circle recruiting more asshats like me. If there's two things I can't stand, it's redundant waiting and professional competition. So I decided to quit without notice and sprint off into the woods. Fearing a court-martial for desertion, I decided to head east towards King's Landing to find a less geriatric lord's army to join. On the way, I was run down by a group of nearly 30 assorted hoodlums and ne'er-do-wells, the biggest group I've faced so far. They demanded I surrender, but rather than roll the dice on finding out what this man intended to do to me if I got off my horse, I called their bluff. As you can see from the look on their leader's face, either he found this quite surprising, or someone just remotely turned on his bee vibe. Emerging from that encounter surprisingly unscathed, I thought to myself that we no longer needed to fear common bandits. That is, until about 5 seconds later, as I discovered that this stretch of road between Lannisport and River Run is absolutely infested with them. Sure, I could win against 30 bandits, but how about 80? Rather than find out, I tried to take refuge in this castle. But perhaps assuming I was another bandit, the sergeant-at-arms told me to go the hell away, or he would have his men shoot me with crossbows. It was then that we ran into a new type of bandit, robber knights. These guys looked like serious business. They were wearing actual plate armor, and riding horses that wear clothes, almost like professional soldiers. In fact, I'm about 80% sure these might have been the soldiers from that castle, pretending to be bandits so they could human traffic me. After I finished changing my pants, I sat back down to fight them, and, to my surprise, these guys are pushovers. I was excited to loot them, and just as I had hoped, the loot pool consisted almost entirely of shoes. Some of them were actually fantastic, so after we finished prying them off of their previous owner's rigor mortis feet, we put them on ourselves. We also found these gloves that invert the flesh on our forearms. I decided to keep them on because the armor value is nice, and because we could stand to shrink our hitbox a little. Arriving in River Run, we once again looked at the disappointing inventory of arms and armor, and saw the outrageous prices of some of the trade goods. Interestingly, this city, famously built along a river, is charging almost 3 times the regular cost for fish, and some of the luxury goods like, oil and pottery are selling for more than I just earned from selling all of my, ransomed prisoners. Before leaving, we got a quest from this man, Jordan the Wart. It started when I asked him how he got his odd name, and it ended with me agreeing to do this job for him if he'll put his pants back on. He wanted us to go clear out a bandit camp, as the robber knights had taken his business associate hostage. Bobby waited until nightfall to attack, which is when the game tried to warn me that this quest was meant for people who had friends, and I could invite mine if I wanted. Ignoring this, I charged into the bandits' canyon base with the full force of my antisocial tendencies. We got pretty far before I got caught in a trap while looking for things I could loot. These barrels pinned me in a perpetual falling animation. I tried every Australian breakdancing technique I could think of, but ultimately I had to load a save and start the hideout over again. After hacking my way through 12 men single-handedly, the bandit captain decided it was a good idea to challenge me to an honor duel. After smoking him in an instant, I mad-dogged the remaining bandits until they agreed to tie themselves up so I could sell them to the ransom broker. With 7 more bodies in tow and a new helmet and gambeson, we returned to collect our bounty. While we were gone, River Run decided to host a tournament, and so I decided it was time for Bobby to develop a crippling gambling addiction or die trying. The prize was listed as Tully Shoulders, and after wondering if a cannibal playthrough was in the cards, it became apparent that this was actually some kind of armor. Bobby bet on himself as much as his new bookie would allow him to, and entered the melee. All in all, it was a nice return to Bobby's roots. I got to fight for a crowd with what the arena master assured me were definitely just practice weapons, and we summarily beat the literal blood out of every competitor that stood in the way of us collecting on the 4-to-1 odds we had against us in round 1. We even got to kill a horse again. In the end, we walked away with some new shoulder armor, and about 1,000 gold in gambling winnings. It was here that I disgusted with the limits the game had placed on me, decided to get a mod that would raise the maximum bet amount so that we could actually make money from these tournaments in the future. A bet of 150 gold amounted to about the price of a cheap pair of shoes, and we had like 100 of those. We stopped in Haraway on our way to King's Landing and saw this bow, perhaps the first worthwhile piece of equipment we've run into. Thanks to our recent stock positions on silk and beer prices, we were just barely able to afford it. Having heard that we are now armed with premium hardware, some rich cuck from Volantis offered us a mercenary contract. I'm not going to take it, mostly because I have no idea where that is, and this seems like it's some early form of the Nigerian prince scam. On arriving in King's Landing, we had a chance to participate in yet another tournament. This time, the prize was perhaps the best pair of boots in the entire game. King's Guard boots number 2. Not only that, but this was a chance for us to show off in front of our half-brother before potentially joining his retinue. This one gold cloak and I beat down on several of his colleagues, and a few members of the King's Guard who attempted to prevent me from winning a pair of their sweet kicks. And just like that, we were one shiny pair of shoes richer. We learned something on our journey to King's Landing, though. That even though the North was now at war with the Lannisters, no one was doing any real fighting. I decided to head south rather than join up with Joffrey's army to see if there were more chances to sate my bloodlust in the Stormlands or in the Reach. While exploring the Reach, we met Dickon Tarley. With a name that makes you question the ethics of his parents, I knew he had the intrinsic motivation to seek out violence that I needed in my employer. So I became one of Dickon's homeboys. Fairly quickly, we found ourselves in a real pitched battle and spent the whole time ignoring orders, riding face first into infantry formations, and harvesting skulls like this is a Warhammer mod. Dickon must have appreciated this, though, because instead of the usual loot pile consisting of a dozen pairs of used shoes, he let us loot the enemy's supply of medical-grade morphine. I knew I'd sensed something special about him, and Dickon was turning out to be the best boss I'd ever had. I decided to return the favor by participating in a tournament while we were stopped in Ashford to resupply, but unfortunately, dedicating my victory to Lord Dickon was a little lackluster after I gave him a concussion in the final round. It was around this time that Dickon and the rest of the Reach nobles gave me a master class in Game of Thrones wartime strategy straight out of Season 6. After gathering an army of 600 men, Paxter Redwine bravely led us right past an enemy army besieging one of the Reach's castles, Honeyhold, and deep into enemy territory to besiege Sky Reach, a fort in the middle of the desert. To my astonishment, taking this small fortification with no strategic value was actually a joint military operation masterminded by notorious mama's boy Mace Tyrell. Seemingly every lord in the Reach, divided across 3 armies, had concentrated their forces here to bring down Skyhold, sacrificing the rich, fertile lands of Honeyhold as a diversion. We arrived with Dickon's party just in time to not participate in the actual battle, then spent the next week indecisively riding around in the desert while tripping on peyote. Eventually, Paxter decided it was time to retake Honeyhold, and we began the 2-week-long journey back to the Reach. Taking back the castle was an exciting affair. There was a point at the start of the battle where a mangonel on the right bastion killed about 50 of our men in one salvo. So I made it Bobby's mission to disassemble that mangonel, and all the men operating it, with extreme prejudice. It took some maneuvering, but eventually we made it up the wall and shut down the artillery crew. Once we had free rein to chop away at the catapult, though, I decided I couldn't pass up on this chance to power level our throwing skill. After becoming a pyromancer, we came down here and opened the gates, not to allow our troops in, but to force all the surviving defenders to prioritize closing the gate over everything else, forcing them to rush out of their positions and past hundreds of angry Reachmen, only to find me waiting by the door. With Honeyhold safe again, my relationship with Dickon had reached new heights, the one where I'm finally allowed to buy the equipment of his highest-ranked troops. That will help with the inconsistencies in our kit, and get us some good pieces for the things we haven't been able to upgrade in a while, like our horse armor. With that, I decided Dickon had given me all he could give, and so we rode off to continue muscle maxing elsewhere. So far, the quest to get jacked has been going well. We've grinded Bobby up to the point that he's a world-class one-handed swordsman, archer, and horseman, and a competent athlete and polearm person? However, all real heroes use a two-handed weapon, so our next objective is to find somewhere on the map where we can buy one, and then get good with it. We followed the tournament circuit back up to King's Landing, and while we didn't see any standout two-handers, this Valyrian steel one-hander was quite the find. I had nowhere near enough money to buy the thing, but seeing it gave me an idea. If we could seize the means of production and produce weapons like that for ourselves, we could not only supply our own top-tier two-hander, but we could sell our products to our allies abroad and bankroll our conquest of the Iron Throne while assembling the largest shoe collection known to man. I took a look in the smithing menu, and my jaw dropped so hard it made Hiroshima flinch. Apparently, the mod developers and I share a fondness for ketamine, because that's the only rationale for why they left all the Valyrian steel sword components unlocked at level 0. They'll require a huge amount of Damascene steel ingots to actually produce, but by smelting down scrap metal we steal from all the corpses we keep finding by coincidence, we should be able to keep a consistent supply on hand. With that, we continued making our way north, all while grinding our smithing, using tournament winnings to upgrade our armor and refill our charcoal supply, and assaulting every homeless person we came across. We made our way through the Vale, back down through the Riverlands, and ultimately up to the north proper. It was here that we finally amassed the 25 Damascene steel ingots we needed, and forged our sword. Unfortunately, I forgot to check the difficulty level in the smithing menu, and to make this thing properly, we'd basically need to be the Greek god Hephaestus, but then pop a bunch of Adderall and get really lucky. Instead, we ended up with a severely nerfed version of the sword we wanted. I named it that thing my parents always call me, and went hunting for some test subjects in the snowy wilderness. As it turns out, severely nerfed Valyrian steel is still pretty insane. With that, we made one more lap around the north, smelting down all the shopping carts and copper wire we could steal along the way, and managed to grind our way up to stimmed-up Greek god levels of smithing to have another crack at forging a legendary blade. This time, we had more than enough smithing levels to surpass the difficulty of crafting the sword. And so, at last, we could make a sword worthy of the hand of Bobby Hill. And here it is. With a weapon length of 120, it will outrange all one-handed weapons. And with a two-handed cut damage of 138, it hits about 4 times harder than the average sword. All of that while maintaining a high swing speed. We named this beauty after Bobby's signature self-defense move, but then I realized we now had a marketable skill and some leftover materials. With a little extra work, Bobby had something to show for his investment besides a very killy murder stick. Now that we had joined the ranks of the 1%, it was time for Bobby to develop an investment portfolio that went beyond repossessed footwear and looted opiates. I'm talking about the real deal. Good old-fashioned American passive income in the form of overseas manufacturing. See, in Mountain Blade 2, if you own a business and you go to war with the faction who controls the city that business is based in, your corporate tax rate is instantly increased to 100%. Since we plan on declaring war on these places when Bobby makes his bid for the throne, this is problematic. Thankfully, this mod includes an entire separate continent full of nations that will happily take my investments to start mass-producing and exporting cheap garbage to sell to the Westerosi market. We boarded a ship and made our way to Pentos. On the way, we continued plying our craft, so we had some tangible investments we could borrow against. Owning a business is all about supply and demand. So Bobby quickly assessed the markets of each Associ city we stopped in to determine what supplies were plentiful, then demanded that the locals sell their businesses to him. We continued down the coast, buying up companies like billionaires buy up social media platforms, until we had 5 out of 5, the max our clan tier would allow. As we continued east, we eventually came to Slaver's Bay, and we saw that Daenerys Targaryen had taken control of the cities there. Bobby is 3 things before all others, and that's ambitious, single, and stupid. The first 2 made it inevitable that upon seeing a white-haired lady riding atop a horrifying dragon, Bobby would become excited. The third thing meant that the way he would handle this is by walking right up to Daenerys and offering her his hand in marriage, right there and then. However, once he worked up the courage to approach her, we were shocked that Dany didn't quite look like her profile pics. What's worse is that this crooked-faced, purple-eyed creep pushed Bobby one step closer to becoming a chronically online incel by dancing around rejecting him and telling us her cute friend was single. And so Bobby rode away heartbroken. Daenerys may have broken Bobby's heart, but the truth was he had become the Giga Chad he set out to be. Our combat stats and physical attributes were all maxed up. We had a world-class horse, a state-of-the-art suit of plate armor, and we had amassed a liquid wealth and passive income that could fund a private army. There was, however, one more piece of unfinished business that Bobby needed to see to before we could consider today's challenge complete. See, long ago, just after our first tastes of victory over the homeless masses of Westeros, a strange man in a bar lied to us. This son of a bitch and his associates have been buying up our prisoners tongue-in-cheek all this time, pretending they were being humanely disposed of in a massive industrial deportation system. But at long last, Bobby laid eyes on the truth. 50 warriors stood between Bobby and the proof he needed so that he could rest easy, knowing the truth about these ransom brokers. Unafraid and a little high, Bobby rode down their elite cavalry and emancipated their organs from their chests. Then, he taught all their followers a lesson in open-mindedness. With that group of slavers dealt with, Bobby cased their headquarters until nightfall, when he launched a daring solo attack. One at a time, these lying bastards were no match for the fury of Bobby, and he put them all to the sword, until at last the slavers' leader showed himself. We had tracked down the bastard that started it all back in case, the original ransom broker. He issued a challenge for a duel. But there was more than enough of Bobby to go around, so we took the high road by 3v1ing him and his cronies. Now, with the ransom broker dead on the beach, and Bobby victorious, we were ready to move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs on our quest for self-actualization. We are now a mighty god, crafting masterworks and letting loose hell on the battlefields of Westeros and Essos. Further, we are a business magnate, and have fostered the economic power we will need to take the throne. Best of all, we managed to accomplish all of that while remaining 100% homeless. Take that, corporate oligarchy. With that, as Bobby begins his voyage back to Westeros, he does so thinking that maybe his daddy would actually be proud if he could see Bobby now. I hope you liked this challenge. I plan to continue Bobby's story very soon, and I plan to bring you a lot more of this content in the future, so long as my autistic hyperfocus sticks around. If you did enjoy, you should press the buttons below that let me know that. And if you want to see more of me, there's a button for that too. Also, maybe check out this other video I made especially for you. Don't forget to drop a comment below, letting me know where I can buy more milk of the poppy. And, bye.